Okay, well, we are at 1 o'clock Eastern, so I am going to jump into this. Thank you, everybody who is here promptly, and if you're a couple minutes late, it's okay. We'll catch you in here. I have a fabulous assistant today, Becca Gulong, who has just been a dear to come and help out and support today. If any of you caught the webinars earlier, sometimes I was a little befuddled to catch the chat and things like that, and so we just want to make sure that this is full of participation. So Becca's here to be my right-hand woman, my left-hand woman, and take care of everything. And we will just get this going. So we want this to be interactive. The last two were very much me talking and then us having Q&A at the end. And this one, really hoping to have more conversation throughout the whole presentation. And in fact, it may change some of the direction of the presentation just so we make sure everybody's questions get answered. So if you're not familiar, I'm just going to walk through real quickly what happens to be interactive with us. So the first one is the chat. At the bottom or the top of your menu bar, depending on where your menu bar sits on your computer, you will see a little bubble that looks like chat. And when you click on it, a little window will pop open. In that window, you want to type in what you want people to see, and then select in that little blue part with a drop-down arrow. Make sure you're selecting who the audience is, because it can either go to just Becca and I, or it can go to the entire group. And then there's the Q&A, which is also in that same menu bar. Looks like two speech bubbles. And in this part, you can type in a question down in that little open field at the bottom. When you type your question in, it's going to ask you if you want it sent anonymously. You want to check on whether you want it sent anonymously or not. If you choose for it to be anonymous, it might be harder for us to answer it, for you to clarify what your question is. So we do encourage you to just leave your name on there. We're not calling you out for any reason, and then click send. And either we will respond to it live. Becca will be reading out questions to me, or if it's something that's too lengthy or has already been answered, it'll be just answered in the chat. Either way, we will make sure we get it answered. And then the last part is to raise your hand. If you have a question or if you want to ask a question, you can put your hand up by clicking on this little part of your menu bar. And when you do that, two things are going to happen. One is that Becca's going to be very aware that you want to say something and ask a question or whatever, or vote on something or whatever it is. And also the menu bar changes. And when you are done with your hand being raised, you want to make sure that you lower your hand by clicking on that part of the menu bar. So if you want to leave your hand up the whole time, that's fine, but it might make us a little confused here. So if you can remember to lower your hand once you've gotten our attention, that'd be great. So let's jump into this. My objectives for today are to build awareness of the different tactics that companies can use to increase disability inclusive workforce, to review how compatible tactics build a stronger outcome, and discuss how you combine and align those with your corporate goals and your other components of your inclusion strategies.
So Deb, we actually have now lost our view of the closed captioning.
Oh dear. Does that work?
Yep, there. It seems to be back.
Okay, it is my it's my view. I have to keep the screen up higher, which just makes it hard for me to use the menu. I know everybody will forgive me if I have any glitches with the menu. But okay, so let me back the screen up for a second. These were the menu, the objectives, my objectives. And what I want from all of you is to know what's your objective. So I'm leaving my objectives up with the fourth option of something different. And I would love for you to type into the chat, what do you want to learn today? What is your goal? What is your question? Why'd you come here except to see us, our beautiful faces on screen? And I will hold until somebody types something in. Just remember, it's the chat is in your menu. Looks like a little speech bubble.
And if you have a similar objectives, feel free to just type in 1, 2, 3, or 4. You don't have to type out the whole sentence. Right. We are happy just to take the number.
Good reminder. Otherwise, you're going to have to go with my program. And really, I do want to know what other people want to know.
All right, we don't have any yet, so it looks like we should just go with your numbers. And we do have one. I'm an employment specialist supporting people with disabilities, here to learn more about hiring and employment strategies, and approach my work from a different angle. How we can encourage companies to develop natural supports. We have one vote for number one. Thank you for using that option. So building awareness and different tactics companies can use. So it looks like we've got a couple who are really about these tactics and strategies to get started. We've got a number two that has just popped up as well. How compatible tactics build a stronger outcome.
Great. All right. I'm going to hold just one more second in case people are typing something in. I know it can be challenging to get it all typed in before the presenter moves on, which isn't fun. But okay, I'll keep moving on. And if you have, I see a couple.
Four. Excited to hear some new perspectives. We have Disability Center Specialists. Part of their role is developing inclusive workforce opportunities for students. So the objectives you've listed will help further those professional development and learn about potentially different strategies and approaches. So great.
Awesome. Okay, great. I am so glad that everybody has joined us, and thank you for participating. Sorry, that was the cue for the chat. I will be sending a PDF of all of the methods that I'm going to talk about today, so you do not have to madly take notes during this. Feel free to take a screenshot if you want something, but just know that I will be sending, when I send the replay of this webinar, I will be sending a document that explains each one of these as well with some examples. In addition to that, I need to make sure that I say this is being recorded so that we can send the replay. You will get the replay whether you have watched the webinar or not, so that for those people who are in a different webinar right now or had something other conflict, they'll still be able to get the information. If you want to be able to rewatch it, you will get it as well. And the replay will be captioned. So it may take me a day to be able to send it out to you all, but I will send it. It just takes some time to get the captioning lined up with the video. So we'll get going. And I appreciate everybody's input, because it's very challenging to think about disability inclusion in just one way or one route. There are so many different ways that companies can increase their disability inclusion. And I've broken it into 3 different dimensions. And now I don't want anybody to get overwhelmed, but there's actually 12 methods within those 3 dimensions. So we're going to go through those, and anyone that you want to spend more time on or know more about, who else has been using it, I'll give you all the information I've got on that. Or if you have questions about how to implement it, I'll try to answer them here. But if it gets to be a lengthy conversation, we'll need to move on because of the time constraints, and then I will try to provide a better answer. I'll add it onto the document that goes to everybody through the replay. So we've got cultural tactics that are red, we've got workforce development tactics that are bright blue, and we've got corporate social responsibility tactics that are of the darker blue. And it's really an interesting exercise to break down, what do companies do to improve their disability inclusion? So here we go. First question, why do I know how to talk about this stuff? And for anybody who doesn't know, I guess I should say, I'm Deb Russell. And I'm here to explain everything that I know about this topic in 1 hour to you today. I started my career as a special education teacher. From there, I went to be a job coach, job developer, running job development programs. Then I moved on to work for the state of Illinois and then the city of Chicago, taking their workforce development programs and making sure that they were accessible to people with disabilities and that people with disabilities were benefiting from them. So when there used to be a dilemma for people who were receiving benefits, whether they could work or not, might lose their eligibility to Medicaid, I was involved in the initiatives in Illinois that helped make sure that we could bridge that gap so that people would be able to maintain their access to healthcare, as well as to be able to go on and have jobs. But one of the most fabulous things that I ever did in my life was that I had the opportunity to create this at Walgreens. If you aren't familiar with what happened at Walgreens, starting in 2006, we decided we wanted to employ more people with disabilities. We started with our distribution centers, then we went to the stores, and then we went to corporate. I was there for 7 years, developing these programs, ensuring that Walgreens could be a great employer of people with disabilities, and tweaking things internally in the company so that we were a better employer of people with disabilities, and also just making sure that it was being spread across the company. Walgreens, when I left, was at 150,000 employees in the US. Since then, they've become a global company. They're even bigger. We had 8,000 stores when I was there. Who knows how many stores they have now? I don't keep up with those details, but it was a very big undertaking. And it was such an incredible honor to be involved in figuring out how companies do this well. And then I left. I'm sorry.
We have an attendee who has a student who is interning at Walgreens right now. So it's a wonderful connection.
Oh, good. It's still going on. That's always my fear, is that, it can be challenging at times for Walgreens to manage and continue these programs all the time. And so I'm just excited to hear that somebody's actually benefiting from that. That's wonderful. When I left Walgreens, one of the reasons I left was because while I was there, our goal was to teach the world how to do this. We provided a lot of tours to companies that wanted to come and learn. And that took up a lot of my time. So eventually I decided to leave Walgreens and be able to help other companies outside of Walgreens be able to learn how to do this. So that's what I do now. I help companies employ more people with disabilities. I spend a lot of time with a variety of companies in different industries and around the globe. But what I found in the last 3 years was that the companies were very challenged to find workers with disabilities, qualified workers with disabilities, because there wasn't a great connection between the agencies that serve people with disabilities in those schools and the companies. So the last 3 years, I've been teaching agencies and job coaches and people like that how to connect with businesses so that we can get more people with disabilities into the employment ranks. That's enough about me, though. So what I noticed about the registrants for this webinar was that it was a much larger number than the first two. I'm doing an annual webinar series, one per month. The first one was on why would somebody want to employ people with disabilities. The second one was, what does a company need to do to employ people with disabilities? And today is the third one, how to employ people with disabilities. So I'm not going to cover much of what was in the why and the what. However, you can watch them on the replay, and Becca's going to pop into the chat the link where you'll be able to access that. And we'll do that one more time so you don't have to worry about scribbling that down right now if you can't get it out of the chat. But just know that those two topics were already covered in a webinar just like this one. And today we're really going to focus on how. So I want to start with what image comes to your mind when you hear disability? Typically for people, it's somebody with Down syndrome, somebody who uses a wheelchair, somebody who's using a service dog or a white cane, which generally indicates that they're blind, although not necessarily. Somebody who's using sign language, or somebody famous like Stephen Hawking. So I would love if you would type into the chat just what comes to your mind. It can be one word. It doesn't have to be politically correct. Just kind of curious, what comes into your mind when you hear disability or when you think of disability? What's the image or the thoughts that come into your mind? It can be one word, 2 words, doesn't have to be a sentence. And I will wait.
And you can send it just to the panelists if you're, want to just put that word out there and are worried about what somebody else might think, put it out. Neurodivergent has come through.
Nice. That's not one I have on here. Great.
Normally Down syndrome, differently abled.
Yeah.
These are great. Go ahead and keep them coming for us.
Right.
Slower to learn.
True. That is something that comes to mind.
Any impairment that impacts activities of daily living. Unique backgrounds, diverse.
Yeah.
My employees.
I'm waiting for somebody to say my sister or my brother or a family member.
I'll put out my son's best friend. That one comes from me.
Yeah. For me, it's people I know who have disabilities, not necessarily the symbol of them. But for a lot of individuals, it is sort of that symbol of disability or the more well-recognized ones because you can physically see them. And what I want to do is kind of change that. And I think that employment really has an impact on that. So when we talk about Down syndrome, how many of you think of Madeline Stewart, who is a fashion model? She walks the runway at New York Fashion Week, as well as around the globe at different fashion weeks. She is an amazing model, really demonstrating how to show off the clothes and those sorts of things. But she's a woman with Down syndrome from Australia. The next thing I want you to think about is athletes. So these are blind athletes with their guides there, but the guides are just there to keep them on the track. They have to be the ones who run the race and win the race. As we can see, Canada's beating Chile right now. And then I think about people who I know who use wheelchairs, typically are professionals who use wheelchairs, and they're usually moving pretty fast, which is why I just love this photo. And then the other one is to think about Stephen Hawking not in his chair. Here he is at the zero gravity facility where they gave him a real great time to spend in space, since he wasn't going to be going there on his own. That was before he passed away. And then some of the professionals with disabilities, as well as the athletes with disabilities. These are all disabilities that we can see. We also are well aware that that's only 25% of people with disabilities. 75% have non-apparent or disabilities that we can't see. And we still want to keep them in mind when we're talking about this. So, as I said, there's 3 dimensions to these disability inclusion tactics, and I'm going to dive into them. I just want to know, does anybody have a preference over cultural, workforce, or the corporate social responsibilities, which you can abbreviate CSR? If you want to just type into the chat anything that you would like me to hit first, so that we make sure it's in that order.
And while we're waiting for that, I will let you know that we had somebody share with us that they were at a presentation such as this last year, talking about Walgreens as well as another company that they can't recall, but they found it interesting and a great service to help individuals who want to work and get trained and things they need to know to become productive members of society and feel good about themselves. We also have 3 responses right now that say workforce.
Okay.
So
I was kind of assuming that was going to be people's preference.
For workforce.
Okay. I am going to skip forward and then I'll back up to slides. So let's just dive right into workforce, which means you're going to have to watch me flip through these slides real quick. Sorry. I don't know how to do this otherwise. So here we go. Workforce development tactics. Let's start here. And again, I will send you a document that has the description of everything, so that if we don't get to it all here, it will come with the replay tomorrow or at the very latest on Monday. So there we go. The first thing that companies use as a tactic generally for workforce development and to make sure it's more inclusive of people with disabilities is job fairs. There are countless organizations that run job fairs specifically for candidates with disabilities. They can be state organizations that are designed around a particular state or a very particular neighborhood. They could be job fairs that are designed around a specific disability type, or can be much more global. So there are national organizations that run job fairs for candidates with disabilities, for businesses to be able to recruit candidates with disabilities. But another really great way to think about job fairs to increase your employment of people with disabilities is through recruitment activities on campuses, college campuses. That's another great way to really be able to leverage individuals with disabilities into your workforce. And I like to point out Procter & Gamble because they do such a great job of really bringing in people from their employee resource group who have disabilities to come to those recruitment fairs, because it just sends an additional message to the candidates that this is an employer who's very welcoming of people with disabilities, really wants to make sure that they have a diverse workforce with people with disabilities. So these job fairs are great places to find candidates. If you want to have them specific to your company or to your industry, that is another way to carve them out. Job fairs long ago, well, not that long ago, were always in person, very sometimes crowded events. They're now virtual. Virtual job fairs are an amazing use of the technology. And last year, after we all went into lockdown for the COVID restrictions, I was lucky enough to go through quite a few virtual job fairs specifically for new graduates from college, and having them go through that. And their usage of the technology was amazing. The opportunity to chat with the recruiters through those virtual events was really great. So I think of job fairs as one of the lower hanging fruit components of accessing more people with disabilities, because it is a pretty easy, low effort event. You just need to sign up for it. You need to send your recruiter just like you would for anything else. But you know that the candidates that you're getting through job fairs that are disability specific will be people with disabilities. And it allows you to have more detailed conversations with people and really have an opportunity to explore where they fit within your organization. My quick caution about that for job fairs is make sure that what you're doing is accessible, that you are prepared to provide the accommodations that might be available through that job fair, like external interviewing rooms so that you can have a more quiet environment to have conversations, sign language interpreters, your materials being available in a variety of settings. Again, those are kind of accommodations for a live event, but we will go back to live eventually. The pandemic will end and we will have those kinds of environments. And then from the virtual aspect, if you're going to participate in a virtual job fair, you want to think about the accessibility from the technology side, ensuring that if you as an employer are participating in a virtual job fair, make sure that the platform is accessible to people with disabilities or that captioning is being made available for individuals who leverage those kinds of accommodations. Same with making sure that the feed is screen reader friendly and to be able to be comfortable if a job seeker says, I'm leveraging screen reader technology or something else about their experience while you're talking to them during the job fair, you want to make sure that you are prepared for that as well. And recruiting Slate targets, which a friend of mine was proofreading this PowerPoint. And she goes, "What is a recruiting Slate target?" So I think most people know I'm not an HR professional. Obviously, I came from the disability world. I spend most of my time now with HR folks, but this is what I call them. And it is when we're looking at recruiting slates, meaning we're presenting a bunch of candidates for an open job, those are called slates, that those slates have targets to make sure that some percentage of the candidates that come through have a disability. And this is a typical tactic for companies to use for all sorts of diversity groups. When they're trying to ensure that they're going to be gaining more women into their workforce, they will require that their recruiting slate be a certain percentage of women. Same with any other diversity group. I could go through a million examples. We don't need me to do that. But the idea that companies can determine that they want a percentage of the slate of the pool of candidates to be people with disabilities when they're narrowing it down. It doesn't mean they have to hire the person with a disability, but you can't hire a person with a disability if none of the candidates are people with disabilities. So as companies are looking at how to really expand their access to good candidates with disabilities, one of the ways to do it is to require your recruiters to ensure that they're bringing in a very diverse slate to you. And I think that goes whether you have internal recruiters or whether you're using a recruiting service. I had the opportunity to work with a couple of companies who had external recruiting entities, they had contracts with recruiting entities, and they built it into the contract that the recruiters had to make sure that there were people with disabilities in there, which makes things complicated for the recruiters. Don't get me wrong. That is not an easy thing to do because you've got to juggle the information and ensuring that you have that in there without passing it on to the people who are doing the interviewing. But it is a way to assure that you've got the opportunities to hire people with disabilities. Because if people with disabilities aren't coming into your pool of talent, then you can't hire them. So that's just it's a pretty simple way to do it. It's not as simple as I make it sound. There are some complications about information confidentiality, but it's a great way to really send a message. In fact, when we were setting up the program for Walgreens, the Retail Employees with Disabilities Initiative, REDI, READY, the goal for READY from the store's leadership was that 10% of new hires would come from READY, because then they knew that they were hiring people with disabilities. And they wanted to be ensuring that they were bringing in at least 10% candidates with disabilities. So it was a good way to really leverage that information. Again, it can get complicated managing that information. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing about confidentiality and how you need to protect that. Companies are aware of that. You all are aware of that. But so you have to keep that in mind as you're doing that particular tactic to bring more people with disabilities into your workforce. There are several ways that companies can use these tactics. And I just want to talk about them for a second. So when companies are encountering the idea of employing people with disabilities, and we talk about these tactics, all these different ways that they can increase their employment of people with disabilities, they say, well, I need more help doing that. So they can hire external consultants, people like myself, James Emmett. There's a myriad of people that offer the services. And they can do it with you, or they can do it for you. So some of the contracts I work on, we actually go and find that sourcing, get the partnerships going, things like that. In other cases, we're just helping the company do it. You can outsource it completely. And again, like all other recruiting, you can outsource this to the resume databases that are out there that are disability specific. There seems to be another one popping up every week. In fact, somebody reached out to me this morning and said, "Oh, we're putting this together. Can you have all your company clients use this?" And I thought, well, there's so many, but I'll put it up there on the sheet with everything else. And then there's internal specialists. And I don't know if I know the folks from Sephora signed up for this, but I don't know if they were able to make it because there's a competing webinar in this time slot. But that is one of the things that Sephora did, as well as Walgreens. Internal people were the specialists who are really looking at making sure that the company's recruiting is with more people with disabilities. So at Walgreens, it was me, and there are a couple other people, Angie and Mark, who are still there, helping to make sure that the pipeline of talent is people with disabilities, as well as managing some of the other things that are there. Sephora started out wanting to partner and then bringing it in-house because they had such a load of people. That doesn't sound right. Had such a large quantity of employees with disabilities. They wanted to have some expertise.
And they are here today, and they're going strong. They just represented in chat for us.
Excellent. So glad you guys are here. I didn't know if you'd go to Tom's webinar or mine, but so excited to hear. And if I misspeak about Sephora, because I was just on the peripheral, please feel free to jump into the chat and correct me, and we'll put the microphone on for you if you want, so that you can straighten out anything that I misrepresent. But watching Sephora take this on has just been, it's like watching your kids go to college and then getting a job and moving on. It's so rewarding for me to see that. The other piece about internal specialists can be that there are certifications for recruiters, certified disability recruiters. I can't remember the acronym, but there's a certification for recruiters to understand how to recruit in disability, recruit people with disabilities specifically. And the Sierra Group offers that certification. And finally, when I was working with TD Bank, they had a diversity recruiter. So one person on the recruiting team was responsible for relationships with all sorts of diverse groups to ensure that their pipeline was being filled with people with all sorts of different diverse backgrounds, including people with disabilities. They were very specific about making sure that this diversity recruiter knew how to and focused on people with disabilities. So you can do it internally, you can do it outsourced, or you can leverage external consultants to do this. And I know actually Sephora had an awesome external consultant that they started with, which would be Carla, and did a great job taking it in-house. So dedicated internships is the next part of the workforce development sort of tactic that I want to talk about. And dedicated internships can be challenging if you don't offer internships to begin with. So let me back up for just a second and start with talking about when you have an existing internship program at your company. What you want to do is try to actually shave off a percentage that are dedicated to people with disabilities, because that ensures that your pipeline that internships serve as is becoming inclusive of people with disabilities. But I have one caution, because I've been through this experience with one other company that I will not name, where they decided they wanted an intern with a disability, and they didn't run that person through the same internship program that everybody else went through, against our advice, but they had their reasons, and I get it, and it was a good experiment. But what we all learned was that if you're going to have an intern with a disability who isn't going through the same internship program as everybody else, they're really missing on the opportunities for all of the networking that comes through those internship programs, all of the camaraderie that comes with that, and the opportunities to really feel like you're a part of something. I think that's what internship programs do that's so wonderful, is that they really create this sense of team around the interns as they go through the experience together, even in their different assignments. But the other way you can do a dedicated internship program that isn't necessarily integrated with your current internship programs is doing things like Project Search, where there's a very dedicated program that combines education and work experience for younger people with disabilities, although that model is now moving into older adults. But the idea is that when somebody's in high school, finishing their last couple of years of high school, they could be at a work site where they're learning the skills of that particular job. And Project Search is just a fabulous model that I encourage every business to Google or wait for the document that I send you because there'll be a link to reach out to Project Search in your area and see if that's a viable program for you. And coincidentally, without any pre-planning, President Biden on Sunday went to stop in to a hardware store in Washington, D.C. It was covered by MSNBC. And that hardware store just happens to have a Project Search program there. And this wasn't part of the planned visit, but when President Biden was asking about how employment's going, the manager of the store was so quick to start talking about Project Search and all of the hires they've had of people with disabilities through that program. So I think that internships are a great way, not only for you to be able to leverage people with disabilities, but also a way for people with disabilities to gain a broader skill set and a competitive skill set. So those dedicated internships, I think, are really a great way to ensure that people with disabilities are being included and that you are ensuring their inclusion. And so I do encourage people to go down that route. Dedicated internships is such a great way. But this is my favorite one. Pipeline partnerships. This is when a business develops a formal partnership with a company. With an agency that serves people with disabilities or a school or some other disability related source. And this is what we did at Walgreens. So when we were starting in Anderson, South Carolina in 2006, we reached out to the local entities that provided services to people with disabilities and created formal partnerships with them. And they were fabulous. I mean, I can't say enough. And if any of you have seen me yakking on LinkedIn, you know that I just rave about the opportunities that we had with that first set of partnerships in Anderson, South Carolina. It taught us as a company the capabilities of people with disabilities, as well as the capabilities of the services that could be provided that really facilitated people's success in employment. So I will always be so grateful to the Disability and Special Needs Board in the county there. And with the vocational rehabilitation as a backup, really set us up for success and taught us a lot about those partnerships. So I put out there a guide for companies to use on how to select partners, because not every partner is great. And I apologize if anybody is offended by that that's in this audience, but the partnerships that we had that were so successful was when the agency's leadership was focused on making sure that our company was successful in employing people with disabilities. So it wasn't always that their favorite individual job seeker was going to be successful with us, but that as a whole, the group was going to be successful. And I say that because we had a relationship with one entity, I won't name them, where they were kind of pre-training people, I'll get into that in a second, and setting them up for success. And we were saying, okay, here's what we want. Here's the pre-screening guide from our perspective of what a candidate should have to be successful. And they went around those criteria and sent in the person that they wanted to be successful. And within 3 hours, that person was climbing on a conveyor in a distribution center, mouthing off to his job coach, and being so disruptive that every piece of equipment had to shut down for safety reasons. So although this person might have had some of those technical skills, the soft skills were what were missing. And after that individual was removed, we had a serious sit down with the agency and said, we have to be on the same page. We have to work together for this success. I realized that this was somebody that you really wanted to be successful, but they were not a good match for our work site. And after that, we had fabulous referrals from them, and people were incredibly successful. And I don't know if that had happened later on in our relationship, maybe it wouldn't have been so jarring of a memory for me, because not everybody's successful. But when somebody is that unsuccessful after having so many meetings and time together talking about what our company needed and what we wanted, that's just what's key about these partnerships. You have to understand the business's goals, not just, if you're the agency, not just your goals of your job so you're getting a job, but truly making sure that it's a good fit. So the more formalized these partnerships can be with service level agreements and things like that, really assure that as the employer, you know you're getting a good partner, you can relax a little bit and just work on how do I ensure that my workplace is accessible and disability friendly and not have to worry about the pipeline as much. So most of the companies I work with do have pipeline partnerships, dedicated partnerships. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. And in cases where they're not, then we discontinue those partnerships and look for other partnerships. Because when an employer is looking for new employees with disabilities specifically, because we know the benefits of employing people with disabilities, we need candidates to be coming in. And unfortunately, 3 years ago, that's what I saw, was that agencies would agree to these partnerships and then no candidates would flow. And the agencies would say, well, I don't have time, or our candidates have other goals. Well, then don't set up the partnership. So as an employer, because I know I'm speaking to both audiences here, as an employer, be specific about what you need and what you want. And as an agency, be specific about what you can deliver. And then work together, because everybody's goal is more employment for people with disabilities. We're all working towards the same goal. We just have to make sure that we're on the same page. And that's what pipeline partnerships can really do, is set up for success this really nice flow of candidates that continue to be successful and make the initiative successful.
And we do have somebody here from Ohio State University and their TOPS program, which was based off of Project Search. And they're a college program for people with disabilities. And part of their program is internship rotations and employment placement. So that's awesome.
Awesome. That's great. And thank you for being the example of what I was just talking about. This is a chance for anybody else to jump in. I'm not going to necessarily hold on this slide because I want to get to some of the other ones, but please keep bringing your comments and questions in, and Becca will interrupt me for us to get to them, and we'll keep going. So this is the other thing that Walgreens started. It's called an alternative hiring initiative. And I can tell you that it really scared the HR folks at Walgreens in the beginning. So if there are HR folks in this audience right now or watching the replay, hang on, because it's not as scary as that sounds. But we knew we had unintended barriers in our applicant tracking system and in our process to onboard people that would keep people from as many people with disabilities as we wanted to being successful in entering employment. And so we created a workaround, which we gave a nice little name of Alternative Hiring Initiative to. And it means that instead of making people go through the application and go through the interview and some of the other stages of that before they got a job offer, we had them come in through partnerships with agencies that serve people with disabilities, and they showed us they could do the job. They had up to 9 weeks to show us that they could meet our standards. So instead of relying on a more maybe cold feeling application and interview process, we made it warmer. We opened up another door for individuals with disabilities who didn't necessarily have the work experience that others that they would be competing with for these jobs had, or wouldn't come across real great in the interviewing process or through the application itself, but we're still going to be stellar employees. So that was our opportunity. The distribution center sent this up. The stores did it slightly differently. They did it through strictly a training program in store. But it's a great way to do it. And I'm pretty sure that Sephora has something like this where they're letting, I saw it on your website, Sephora, where you're having people have a trial period where they are coming on site, working the jobs, getting paid, but don't necessarily have a permanent job offer until they've demonstrated that they can do the job. And that's what we did at Walgreens at a lot of the facilities. Not every distribution center, but that was something that we piloted. It seemed to work out really well, and it helped us understand our application process so that over time, we could remove some of those unintended barriers and be able to open the floodgates more for people with disabilities. So these alternative hiring initiatives need to be designed well to make sure that you're not violating any of the validity of your application process. But at the same time, we all know people with disabilities are individuals, and sometimes they don't quite fit into the way we're doing things for just about everybody else. And so it was a really great, very formal accommodation that we had offered. But it wasn't something for every person with a disability. Individuals had to come through an agency we had a relationship with so that we knew they knew what our standards were. And again, just like the pipeline, this alternative hiring initiative really worked well for us at Walgreens. And the other thing was pre-hire training. And this was actually classroom training. In some of the distribution facilities at the stores, I know they do it in the store. And I know Sephora does this, and Pepsi did this, Office Depot did it. There's probably at least 100 companies I know of that have used this pre-hire training, where we really know that some people with disabilities take longer to learn something. And so we want to front load that learning curve by offering pre-hire training that's really geared towards the very specific skills and performance necessary to be successful in these jobs. So whether it's forklift training or it's actually learning how to use the customers, pointing at my screen like you guys can see what I'm pointing at. Sorry. You can see customer service training, getting to see the screens ahead of time. It's familiarity with the tools that you're using on the agricultural project that I work on. The high school actually has all of the knives and the other pieces of equipment that we use on the farm, so that individuals can get familiar with what does it feel like to hold these and to use them properly and have that kind of instruction. So it can be specific skills, it can be soft skills, but pre-hire training is a great way to ensure more people with disabilities fit the qualification criteria that you're looking for as people are coming into the workforce.
Sephora has a 9-week program that they're doing at their distribution centers. They're using the models that you created at Walgreens, and it's helped them immensely.
Awesome. I actually, in the document that's going to be sent out, Sephora, you'll see your link because I found that on your on your website that demonstrates the phases, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. It's perfect. So, so thank you, Sephora, because you guys, you've done a great job of making the model your own, and at the same time following kind of the tenets that we had at Walgreens. And I spend more time now talking about the success of Sephora than I do about Walgreens most of the time. So, thank you for everything that you guys have done there. And I wanted to put this slide up there because when we're talking about disability inclusive employment, people get confused between equality and equity. And I just think that this visual, if you can't see it, it is two pictures next to each other, almost exactly the same. And they are with 3 individuals looking at a baseball game over and through a fence. And on one of them, all of those individuals are standing on a box the same level, but the individuals are different heights. So some of them actually can see onto the field and some of them can't. And then on the other side of the picture, they show that the tallest person doesn't have a box underneath them and that extra box has been given to the shortest person. So now all 3 people have their eyes at the same level and they can see the game. And that's really the difference between equality and equity. People get very confused, and even I do sometimes, about whether we're treating people the same or whether we're treating them fairly. And at Walgreens, we had a lot of these conversations with our managers about this. When do you make an exception for a person with a disability and when do you not? When is that actually an accommodation and when is it not? And it's very nuanced. You have to be very open-minded and really be thinking about what's going to be success here for the person, for the manager, and for the company, and then be able to weigh those all against each other. And when you can do that well, that's equity, because you're not always treating people the same. But think about how we treat our workforce right now. We don't always treat everybody the same. If somebody's got an emergency and their mom's in the hospital and they need to leave work right then and there, if they're in a position where that can happen, it happens. But they might be in such a vital job. They might be a doctor doing surgery at that moment. They can't walk out. So again, things are situational, and we want to be aware of that as we're considering what we need to do to be more disability inclusive and what we don't.
So, Deb, we have a question that somebody has asked. Can you speak to how companies can you speak to how companies that approach disability employment from the top, CEO, HR director, should educate, include their store managers, employees at the ground level about these programs and how to implement them?
Wow. That is a very loaded question because, first of all, it depends on the size of the company. But second of all, having worked for an organization for 7 years where the executives were very behind this, and then there was the level at the street level, where the feet hit the pavement or whatever that metaphor is, it's challenging because a CEO's job is to communicate everything. And although disability can be very important, make sure the doors stay open, make sure the bank stuff is getting done, making sure the taxes are paid, making sure we're staying within compliance of all the laws, making sure that the rent is paid, making sure that things are moving in and out, that the advertisements are made, that the whatever's going on, it's a lot of stuff. So I know a lot of CEOs spend time communicating to the rest of their workforce how important disability inclusion is to them. And if they have a specific program running, like at Walgreens, they can be talking about that. But I can say from Walgreens' perspective, I thought our CEOs, because I had 3 or 4 of them while I was there, they did a great job of really talking about and being very passionate about what we were doing around disability. But they were also talking about regulation related to pharmacy. They were talking about opening new stores. During 2008, they were talking about the economic crisis. Lots of things are going on. So not only is their platform of communication limited to what they can put out there about disability, but the audience, so think about every store man, we'll just use Walgreens, think about 8,000 store managers, all the assistant store managers, all the people who work for those stores, hearing all of the information about the company. And not all of them are hearing that it's being out there, but they're not necessarily listening to the disability stuff. So there's a lot of conflict at companies that are their leadership is very supportive of disability inclusion, but it doesn't always trickle down exactly. And there are times that really frustrates the advocates. I know that for sure. It also frustrates the employees who really care about this initiative and these efforts. But at the same time, we have to realize that this has to fit within everybody's why. In fact, if you can pop in that the workshops again, the replays of this webinar, I encourage you, if this is something that you're very interested in, to listen to the why. Rewatch the replay about why, which was January's webinar. Because for a company to invest in this and for a person to invest effort into having this be successful, you have to believe in it. And if you believe in it, that's your why. Why are we doing this? Why is this good for the company? Why is this good for the country? Why is this good for my business? And then think about all of the other things that are the whys. Why is it important to sell this product at this price? Why is it important to make sure that the truck drivers don't go on strike? Why is it important to make sure that the store looks perfect when the customers come in and that all the Kleenex is on the shelf during the sneezy season and things like that? There's a lot of priorities going on. And we need to keep that in as context for when the disability inclusion champions aren't getting their message down, or when people aren't hearing them because they've got so many other priorities. And I just hope that everybody who's an advocate for this gives a little grace to the audience, which are the people out there who are trying to keep these businesses running, especially right now, and that sort of thing, and provide them with the education information that they need, and then have conversations with them, listen to what they're talking about or what they're saying. I've had many people come up to me and say, and tell me a story of somebody who worked at Walgreens, somebody with a disability who worked at a Walgreens and then was terminated for cause. And the person who's telling me the story is generally the advocate or job coach or family member of this person with a disability who's no longer working for Walgreens. And they're very upset by that. And I totally understand that as a very upsetting thing. But if we can actually, on just a very academic level, look at the situation, in most cases, the person was not serving the needs of the store at that time. We lost a lot of people with disabilities and without from our workforce as the economy crashed in 2008 at Walgreens. And at first it seemed like Walgreens was letting go everybody with a disability. But when we were able to analyze the data, it was actually they were letting go of everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people. And some of them were people with disabilities. And the people with disabilities who lost their jobs, most of it was because they didn't have all of the skills that we needed when we were really tightening the workforce. So those are things to think about. Just think about the context larger than what you're focused on, and then find out what's really going to help that person, if it's a store manager or another kind of manager, what's going to help them be successful in their role. And if people with disabilities is the answer to that, then help them get there, whether the CEO has said it or not. But that's a really big question. And I encourage you to watch the why replay, or if you saw the why webinar already and that didn't give you the answer, I'm sorry, reach out to me. I'll try to give you a better answer. Any other questions while we're paused? I'm going to run out of time. I know I am. Okay. I am going to skip the cultural and the CSR ones. Again, you'll get a document that explains them. But the reason I'm going to skip them is because I want to talk about how you can take these tactics and braid them together to create incredible disability inclusion success. So I want to talk for a second about what Walgreens did. So we had ERGs, employee resource groups. We had self-ID campaigns, disclosure campaigns. We had community relations efforts where we were donating money to entities that were aligned with our corporate goals and were focused on disability. We had supplier diversity programs, making sure that disability-owned businesses were part of our vendors. We had pipeline partnerships, as I spoke of, and pre-hire training and alternative hiring initiatives. Walgreens did all of these different things to really make our program incredibly strong. So when people talk about the Walgreens model, this is what they're talking about. It's a variety of efforts all kind of put together and making sure that they were well aligned. And I want to use Microsoft as an example as well. Microsoft has ERGs. They have self-ID campaigns, community relations, supplier diversity. They have the supported employment vendor program. Walgreens doesn't have that. They have alternative hiring initiatives for their neurodiversity hiring initiatives specific to some tech jobs, which also other companies have followed the suit with that particular frame. They have dedicated internships. So that's how things fit together. I would love to spend time asking you guys to throw out all of yours, but I know we're not going to have time. So if you want, I'll make sure that this diagram is in there and you can check through it with your own company and see where you're already exercising the idea of taking things and weaving them together to have a more robust disability inclusion initiative, and where you might have opportunities to strengthen it further.
And if people still want to enter that information into the chat while Deb keeps talking, you'll be able to see a little bit about what each other are doing. So go ahead, and cool. If you have thoughts and ideas or processes you're using, enter them in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Another way to think about this as your company is creating disability inclusive workforce initiatives or other kinds of disability inclusion is that you can do things that are disability specific. And I'm going to use Microsoft as that example with their neurodiversity hiring initiatives that's called Autism at Work. And Bank of America does it now, and EY, and I know I'm leaving off a bunch of other companies that participate in that same model, SAP, so that they're very focused on a very particular disability type and the barriers that individuals experience and how they can make sure that they can break down those barriers as much as possible. But another way to break down disability inclusion efforts is to think about it in just one business unit or one facility or one community. That's what we did at Walgreens. We started with the distribution centers and we figured out what we needed to do in a very controlled pilot before we tried to do it elsewhere and replicate it, and then eventually spread those lessons learned to the rest of the company. So from a company point of view, we do like to try these things and then keep it going. Sephora, I know you guys had a great first pilot in Mississippi. Mississippi, get my southern states confused. And then you moved it on, and you guys now have launched it in every DC, and it's done a great job. You've done a wonderful job of taking the lessons learned and moving it forward unit by unit. And now looking at where else in the company can you do these things. That's what Walgreens did. We learned in the distribution centers first, and then we went and figured it out in the stores, which was a different animal, but it takes focus. And some of the barriers that we broke down while we were looking at the distribution centers then made it easier to do it in other parts of the company, in the retail and then in the headquarters. And some of the things we had to learn what the barriers were specific to those divisions. And I'm going to talk about geography for a second. At Walgreens, we had 22 distribution centers at the time in different communities. Not every community's disability inclusion plan looked the same because sometimes it had to reflect the variances within those communities. Speaking about Ohio, there's some really great communities that have tons of service providers. And there's some smaller communities that only have a couple service providers. And that makes your model for pipeline partnerships to be different. So it isn't always going to look the same. If you've heard of some company being successful in one small area, that doesn't mean that they're doing that everywhere else. And if you are hearing about your own company doing something in one area, it doesn't mean that necessarily you can do it from your part of the company, although it's worth exploring for sure. All right. I've got 6 minutes left. Again, catch those other webinars. We'll make sure that you get that information. They will also provide you a lot of context that sort of leads into this one that's about the how. And one of the things I really think is important is that not just from those tactics that I talked about today, but also thinking about the why, the what, and the how of disability inclusion. Why is a company doing it? what are they doing to accomplish it and how are they going to accomplish it. Taking those things and putting them together gives you much larger results than just focusing on one particular aspect. Just like all of those tactics that I talked about, those 12 tactics, if you can combine some, you get a much larger level of success, a much more robust level of success where you can have more and more success stories to tell. And the reason that that's important is because success begets success. That's hard to say. You get one success and it starts to snowball and you get more. When a facility manager hears about another facility being successful in employing people with disabilities and hearing about how great it was and what the benefits were, then they want to do it. And then they start doing it and they're talking about the success they've had. And the next general manager hears about it. And that's how things spread. And that's how we can really ensure that a whole company eventually is exploring and benefiting from employing people with disabilities. I'm going to pause to see if there's other questions or comments. If anybody wants to say anything or if they want to have their mic turned on.
As of right now, I don't have any questions, but I am going to put the list of additional resources link into the chat as well, so people have access to that from your website. And we'll keep looking to see if anyone has anything they'd like to share. Feel free again to raise your hand or to type right on in the chat.
Thanks. I am going to back through a bunch of slides. Oh, no, I'm not. I'd like to, but let me try that again because I just want to walk through the 12 again. Let me get this up and then I'll share it.
As Deb is doing that, if people just want to look in the chat, you'll see back to back the links for the last two webinars, as well as the links to those additional resources that are available on her website. And they are right there, so feel free to copy and paste or go ahead and click on them and bookmark them right away.
Thank you. I just want to run through the cultural tactics and the corporate social responsibility tactics so briefly, because they're important as well. The cultural tactics really help you take your workforce that already exists. And
Deb, we are missing the closed captioning again, so
sorry.
Yeah, so, no problem.
Hold on, let me
send it in. Yes.
Hold on, let me stop the share, get that into the right format, and then we'll be able to do it. Thank you for pointing that out.
Absolutely.
A lot of moving menus around.
This is really the joy of the technology.
Taxing my skill set. Here we go. Can you imagine how bad this would be if you weren't here, Becca?
So glad to help.
Okay, so these red ones down here, the ERGs, the mentoring, and the self-ID campaigns, that really helps you take the workforce who already have a disability but may not be telling you that they have a disability or may not feel that they need to be telling you or exposing, or they're hiding and spending a lot of energy hiding their disabilities. They can feel more welcomed there. And that's such a big piece, not just workforce development where you're hiring people with disabilities, but you want your existing workforce to also feel comfortable being people with disabilities and being successful there. And then finally, engaging with the community here in the darker blue ones, the support employment vendor program. I can't say enough about Microsoft. And the link for Microsoft's information is in the document that I'll send with the replay. So you guys can search that all you want. They got tons of videos, toolkits, a lot more information you probably need, but it's such a great program. Supplier diversity in general, just making sure that every part of your company, including the vendors you're using, are representative of people with disabilities. At Walgreens, we had suppliers who were disability-owned businesses. We had disabled veterans-owned businesses, and we also had businesses that employed a lot of people with disabilities as some of our vendors. That was part of our entire very robust supplier diversity program. And then community relations, making sure that the donations we made really aligned with our company's goals. Our company's goals were around health and wellness. And so we were very happy to provide grants to disability organizations that were doing things along the lines of health and wellness. And so as a company looking to include more disability in everything you do, you'll want to look at those aspects. Also, when you have those corporate social responsibility tactics, that gets the disability community excited about you, and it can really increase the flow of candidates simply because people with disabilities have heard about you through those other efforts. So it's not just through the recruiting. I am coming up on the last minute of this. I know people have hard stops, as do I. Any other last chats, questions? Okay. Thank you, everybody, so much for your attention, for your participation. This is great. I'm so excited about the participation, being able to answer people's questions. If I didn't answer everything, please feel free to email me. You'll get the replay and you'll have my email address then if you don't already have it. And just continue on. This is such a necessary part of our business community, and we need to keep moving forward and figuring out how to do it more. And it's such an important part of the disability community as well. So Becca, thank you so much for your help and your support through this. You have been invaluable, and I think y'all can expect to see something like this for the rest of the webinars this year, and we'll just keep moving forward.
Glad to be here, getting wonderful messages in our chat of thank yous and support. So glad to have you all here as well, and wonderful to get to meet people.
Thank you all.